I started.
Thank you. All right. So great. See it there. All right. I'm gonna just give it another second. It keeps dinging that quite a few people are coming in. So I'm just gonna give us another minute here to let everyone get settled in online. And then I'll get us started. See if anyone else comes in person.
Chilly on this side.
I'll shut the door in a
Oh,
minute.
okay.
Okay, well, 11:32, the dings to enter the virtual room have slowed down, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'll kick us off with a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement recognizing the indigenous people of a place. It is a public gesture and appreciation for the past and present indigenous stewardship of the lands we now occupy. The Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness would like to acknowledge we gather today on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina Athabascans. For thousands of years, the Dena'ina have been and continue to be stewards of this land. It is with gratefulness and respect that we recognize the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspectives of the Upper Inlet Dena'ina. So I believe Owen was going to assist me in getting the agenda out. And so first up on the agenda is, if Felix is online, a quick assembly MOA update.
Great. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I am online. Yeah, I guess the latest update from the assembly at our recent meeting, the assembly updated the emergency shelter plan and added 55 rooms at the Alex Hotel as non-congregate shelter. And we are awaiting implementation of that. I believe the administration said it would take about 10 or so days to bring those units online. Yeah, but otherwise, as far as I understand, other aspects of the emergency shelter plan are coming online. I guess one of the things we also did this last assembly meeting was to remove the Golden Lion as part of the emergency shelter plan because we're not intending it to use it as shelter. So that is a separate effort outside of whatever is done with the emergency shelter plan to turn the Golden Lion on as housing. Yeah, I think that sums up the recent actions taken by the Assembly. Thanks.
Felix, any questions for Felix? Or any other questions regarding an MOA update? I don't know if we have anyone else from the MOA that might be able to respond if there are other questions. Okay, not hearing any. So the phase two task force focus and deliverables. I was asked by Belinda to join you all again to talk about how we take this work and make sure that it's responsive to the need of the homelessness prevention response system and that it is designed and stable beyond cold weather. So we kind of, we did an interim plan through the end of December. And as we look beyond the end of December, the focus is meant to be beyond even cold weather, beyond April. It's supposed to be what potential investments or changes could be made to the system, capacity expansions, et cetera, that would meet the need moving forward. So for example, Brother Francis Shelter has increased its capacity to 120 as an ongoing thing, as an ongoing concern. And similarly, having conversations with Covenant House about what ongoing capacity increases they may be able to sustain. So both system expansion on the sheltering side, but also on the housing side. And then figuring out how we can map that out in a way that goes to something that can be presented that appears to be sustainable, with a presentation possibly in November. I know there'd been this idea that we were working towards some kind of presentation this month, but we already made our preliminary recommendations and the system's just getting stood up. Like Felix said, they're bringing on those Alex hotel rooms just now. So reporting again doesn't make a ton of sense. So let's let the system in some ways stabilize as to what it is in the moment. And then we can work on what's the next iteration from there. I believe all of the current pieces of emergency cold weather shelter are stood up through the end of December. So we still have to move with some haste, but I think trying to say, oh, well, here's a plan to shut it all down or to replace it with something else now versus taking some time for the next month would be too hasty. Does that make sense? Is that a common understanding of where we're trying to head? See a couple of head bobs here.
I guess I have a question if this would necessitate a change to the charter or how this relates with like the assembly resolution asking for the coalition to convene the task force.
Felix, thoughts?
Sure. So I think the assembly resolution was fairly narrow in its scope. And the assembly resolution did not envision nor direct sort of next steps after meeting the initial goal, which the task force did when it provided its preliminary recommendation. So I would say that any future work the task force does is truly independent and not directed by the assembly, because it wasn't part of any resolution or effort the assembly thought of.
That was my understanding as well, that we checked the box on the first part. And that there was a desire by the group, however, to not just let the momentum and the work and the knowledge die, and to move it on to something more sustainable. And I would say from the coalition's perspective, I'm a little selfish in that I want that to occur because we do need to look at updating the community's plan, anchored home, and this plays right into that work. I believe Jessica's hand.
On that note, just a quick question. Would the work that, and I know we're going to talk about this later in the meeting, but would the work that the smaller subcommittee has been doing around transition plans out of the current emergency shelter facilities and into something more long-term still be part of that original charter, or would that also be this work kind of continuing on under its own momentum outside of the original scope?
I think that's a great question for the group. I think in terms of what precipitated the convening of the Emergency Shelter Task Force and what it was asked to do, that has been completed. We've checked that box. But at the beginning of this work, we all seemed to have consensus that we didn't want to simply come up with a short-term plan, but that we wanted to take this on in a secondary phase to look past that short-term plan into something else. So I think this has become an independent task force to do that work. If we feel like we need to more clearly specify that it's being convened around anchored home, I'm happy to do that. But we already were clear that we were kind of convening the original task force in the spirit of anchored home anyway. Anytime we're planning for the homelessness prevention and response system, we really are working through the community's plan, whether it's in the interim, short term, or in the longer term with strategic goals. And I saw orange sun pop up as an A-OK to that. So, all right, anything else on trying to think through the focus moving forward and the next deliverable, which we could make these recommendations to the assembly. I think based on the feedback given to Felix, or given by Felix, is we can offer them to them if they want them, but if they don't want them for some reason, then we will have them and we will incorporate them and continue to work through our planning for purposes of anchored home. Anything else on that topic? Okay, so I think as we move forward and we talk through the various committee updates, we'll need to think about how those play into that maybe slightly longer view for system design and stability beyond cold weather. So urgent shelter issues is next on the agenda. It says identify immediate issues to be worked outside of the task force. Is anyone aware of any immediate issues for access to shelter that need to be followed up upon outside of this work that we need to flag? I think as we reach higher utilization, referral processes, intakes, those types of things, if we're finding we're getting stuck, this will be a great place to raise that so that we can take it offline, but everyone can be aware of any bottlenecks we're running into moving forward. I think we'll also potentially have capacity issues start to come up as we work toward the camp abatement date of October 20th. My understanding is it's approximately 100 people who are subject to abatement, and the Alex Hotel happens to be 110 rooms. Or sorry, 55 rooms at double capacity is 110. So sorry, always check my math, folks. Owen asked if we were going to talk about centennial abatement and an inflow event, and we just did. So we'll I think that that's the kind of thing for that item on the agenda, is just to kind of make sure everyone's aware of kind of where the flow in the system is. I am aware that from the Sullivan, particularly on the warming side, if there isn't a bed, they are checking in with Brother Francis Shelter, which has had some capacity and getting transport so people can move from warming into shelter there. Anything else with regards to shelter access or shelter flow at the moment? Okay. I was copied on an email about the insurance requirements. We asked our HUD TA if there were any rules of thumb or best practices. Unfortunately, it's all driven by jurisdiction. So the insurance requirements are the insurance requirements are the insurance requirements. I do believe that the health department on a case-by-case basis is working with folks more on waivers to try to make that process more clear and smooth. Does anyone have anything they want to add about insurance? Okay. I did want to add on the flow for shelter utilization. We are working with the health department at the coalition to identify those who are unsheltered and subject to the abatement notice to see how they are prioritized using coordinated entries, so we can try to get offer the most vulnerable shelter first. So using that coordinated entry process. Similarly, if there is someone in the warming area, if we can kind of figure out where they fall on coordinated entry, then we can use some version of prioritization, which I think is important, and not really have it just be location based, but actually, as HUD likes us to base it based on vulnerability. The offer for shelter can be made. If it's taken, great. If it's not, it's not, but then we know where they're at. Owen asked, was there a streamlined insurance plan for the micro grants? I don't know the answer to that. Is there anyone on for the health department or administration that could answer that?
We don't currently have the micro grants in my department, so I can't speak to that issue.
Thanks, Trish. Okay. All right, committee updates, moving right along. Facilities and site evaluation, we had few join us here in the room, and I believe I saw Chris Shudion and John Waddleton. Are you on?
This is John. I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go for
Okay,
it.
good. Okay, I will go out of order from what you have on the agenda here. Fairbanks Street, old GCI call center. I have not heard back from Larry. I texted him this morning and have not heard back. Under other, we the Pacific Northern Academy, old Pacific Northern Academy site on Braga kind of remains in play. It was in our tier 2 list, and apparently they are more intent on unloading that, and there could be a substantial price drop on that. So Lisa Sauter, I think, is going to try to set up a phone call with the owners and owners rep and just get a better sense on what they are interested in doing with that. You know, price is an issue there because it needs a whole lot of fixing up if it'll even work. Going to the old Alaska News Agency, we've got Hugh there, and so I think if you could give us an update on that, and then I will work finally to Arctic Rec Center, which we've got quite a bit of work done on, and I'll share a screen. So I think, Hugh, can you talk about the ANA building?
Could you go ahead with the Arctic Rec Center? I was gonna look up the, I think that one's pending, the old Alaska News Agency warehouse at Potter and C. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll look it up. I think it's under contract, but go
Okay.
ahead.
Let me see if I can. What am I doing here? I want to share my screen, so I'm going to stumble over this for a bit, folks. Here we go. That's not what I want. Not getting what I want here. Share. How do I get to my share? Chris Schutte, if you're there and you can share that Google Doc faster than I can, that would be a gift to everyone. I'm not seeing how I do this. Should be here.
For what it's worth, I'm not allowed to share either, but it looks like John maybe just got in.
Give control. Do I hit that? Or is that something?
John, I can see your screen. You just need
Oh, you
to
see
do
it? Oh, okay.
need
So
to
we're there.
Down on this little box, and then we'll be able to see it. There we go.
Okay. So you can see it now. Okay. Well,
Can you
perfect.
make it a little bit bigger, maybe?
You ask much of me here. That didn't work.
Oh, that made it different.
Let's see, there's something probably here. Is that what this % is? No, that's formatting.
To the left of that is where it says
Oh, here,
100%.
100%.
There you go.
Okay.
Sure.
How's that work?
Yeah, that's better. Still, yeah,
Okay.
we're gonna talk through it.
Okay, so we will talk through it. Shrink this. I have some notes to the left. So the kind of location subcommittee met just prior to this meeting. So we went through this a bit and added some information. There's quite a bit of information here. Both the Arctic Rec Center on Arctic, which has been a tier 2 location all along, but it just was put on the market. And so it's a little more active now. Several of us toured it on Thursday or Friday. And it's a very attractive building and would likely meet the needs. The land size is extensive at the Arctic Rec Center. There's a lot at Elmore as well, but much of that is still wetlands, would have some constraints, and our estimate is there's about 1.25 acres, for potential expansion at the Tudor Elmore location. At the Arctic Rec Center, there would be, we think over half of that would be available for some either to carve off and sell or to use for expansion of services and so on. Building sites are somewhat similar. The Arctic Rec Center at 23,000 square feet, and the Sprung is being built at 26,000. As far as the utility of it, the Arctic Rec Center, has it was super nice, but it would need some modifications to make it work. What we're looking at Sprung is a purpose-built building, and by their nature, they're very flexible. As needs may change, you can move the walls and so on. So
John, before you move on from there, is it
Sure.
possible, what, I guess, need modifications, are you gonna indicate which ones later, or are we gonna put those in the notes? Cause I'm not sure which ones you're specifying.
But that's a very broad statement. We don't have costs and we don't have a list necessarily. We have, for the Sprung shelter, they would have, be designed where the sleeping area would be designed, presumably with the walls and so on, separating different groups of people and so on would be included in the costs. Whereas at the Arctic Rec Center, that may not be the case. We've got
That's not the case because there's no FFB right now for the navigation center. So, I don't know. Okay, I'll think
we
about that.
work our way down to FFEs. We had quite a discussion on that. So,
Okay, great.
all of these dollars, nothing is totally certain, obviously.
Okay.
But we do find, with Arctic Rec Center, there is more certainty because you know what you're getting for your money. Whereas with the Sprung shelter, we've got obviously a range of possible construction costs and so on. Zoning for the Arctic Rec Center is R3, which is multifamily residential. So that would not be appropriate for the long term. It would need some kind of rezone. I would likely replat and carve off the part with the building and parking and so on for that and make that PLI. And then the remaining land could be, a decision would have to be made on what to rezone that. And we'll get a little bit further down, get more to the rezoning. Both are very close to transit. The Arctic Rec Center is not fenced, whereas the Sprung shelter is. They would both meet health and safety standards. There are utilities available to both sites, space for surge, and we are working on the assumption of 150 with 50 surge, and believe that both buildings would meet that. The asking purchase price of $12.6 million for Arctic Rec Center. Hugh has indicated that's probably ballpark, just kind of running some rough figures there. So that's not a long shot price. That's somewhat reasonable. What is the cost of the Sprung shelter? That remains uncertain. We've put in $15.4 million, and that comes from a variety of places. We have a letter from the city manager on 10/7, has some information. Daily News on 10/14 had 5.4, and we believe this includes the FF&Es that we actually break out a little bit further down. Using the rough order of magnitude estimates, it could go as high as 20.8, 20.9 million based on the work session on October 7. Well, when would it be available? That's the big question because we need this quickly. January of 23 is likely the time you go through the due diligence process and cut a deal with the sellers, and so that gives us about 3 months. The Sprung shelter estimate we heard on 10/7 was mid to late January for up to 100. A little bit problematic because they would be there during continued construction. So, but you can certainly get people out of the cold. And then full finished capacity expected to be sometime around April. And I believe that's if they get the ability to work in the winter and pour that slab. We had listed some other costs, a little hard to compare, but these are costs that we are facing with the Sprung shelter, and that's the shipping cost to bring it up to 100,000. We're paying $5,000 a month to store it right now. So that is obviously variable depending on when we tell them to ship it, should we, or should the city manager. we are city is storing construction stuff for Hickle. He's charging 120,000 a month for that, or 15,000 a month for that. I'm sorry. And our assumption here is that it would be through May. And then potential liability. We've heard that we could be on the hook for 4.9 million to Hickle for work already done and committed. I don't think we really truly know the status of that, but those would be additional costs, could be incurred no matter which direction we go. FF&Es, this is a 2.5 million, and this we had in the letter of 10/7 from the city manager, 565 million for furnishing. And then there's a phrase for alternates, which is kind of brings us to, I think we have a note here, 2.9 million. I think that should say 2.5 as shown in the chart. So, and that would be not just the furnishings, but also all the interior for the structure. The comparable cost for the Arctic Rec Center is a little hard to measure. You know, if the walls and rooms are configured as are needed, then probably not a whole lot. We do expect, as we go down here, that the Arctic Rec Center does not have enough showers, does not have enough toilets, but we were told in our tour they plumbed it so it could handle more quickly. Yeah.
Can you pause? Shelley's got a comment about FFEs. Shelley, do you want to go ahead? Before we move on from the line.
Well, I just noticed he had the last sentence there. It said should be equivalent for both locations. I was just making a note that cost of FF&Es wouldn't be equivalent because Arctic already has, you know, flooring and those kinds of things and many of the bathrooms that you would need and that kind of stuff. So it would be much lower for Arctic.
We put furnishing because that would make sense, right? So it could potentially be that 565.
Sure. Yeah, I think that could probably be comparable.
That would be better. Yeah, appreciate that.
There you go. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so in all cases, we need more showers, more toilets. Bob Dole sent the building requirements. We get to that a little bit further down, just an idea on how many, but we don't have a clear statement on the costs or ability to expand, but in the tour, they did say they plumbed it so that the capacity could be increased at that building. At Arctic Rec Center, there would be a rezone needed. That's about 37,000. Conditional use permit about 10,000. We would do certainly where the building is would be PLI, and then if the larger area, if that were just replatted into one large thing, I imagine the cost would be the same. But we've discussed could be I1, could be B3, could remain R3 to build multifamily. That would be a bigger discussion on what potentially could happen there. Fencing cost at Arctic Rec Center, that's unknown, but presumably some would be needed. And then we list different costs that we have that are essentially sunk costs for the sprung shelter. You see here lines 29 on down. It's already been spent, and these costs shouldn't really factor into a decision moving forward because they've already been spent, but just listed to note them. Operating costs are uncertain. These totals at the top are actually not correct because we have too many unknowns still for the Arctic Rec Center. But I added in here information. We have Hugh, in the documents we got on Arctic Rec Center, they have their utility costs, and they probably change if it's used for 150 or more people. But this is what 12 months of their average utilities have been for the last year.
We call them building operations or building operating costs versus the idea of service operating cost. It's just something that could get confused. Thanks.
I'd have to break this out a little more because as we get down, I did pull some numbers from city manager's letter on 10/7 that would be the operating, because they have personnel here. Supplies, insurance, utilities, personnel, they factored in as if it were operating. So that would, we could try to break that out, but in this, as it's configured right now, it does have, you can see here on the lines 44 through 51 from the city manager's letter. So this is inconclusive at this point. You have to get some more info. And then we get down to the bottom, and Meg, this is stuff that I kind of took what you had sent in the Word doc and pasted it here. So we, again, the building square footage, restrooms, and I believe, Meg, is this what is there now?
Yes, that's the current
Okay.
configuration. There was the staff restroom, and then there was the family restroom, and then men and women.
Okay, good, thanks. So we would buy the building code requirements that the city is using for any kind of shelter like this would be, we need 15 restrooms. If you do 150 clients, and then similar showers, we would need 19. So, and then there's a question, can we expand to that number? I don't know. It's a good Bob Dole question. Space for navigation center or services. My expectation is that the Sprung shelter did have substantial space for offices and so on, but I don't have the details on that. And then, then Meg, you've listed it here, what's available at Arctic Rec Center. Is it secure? Meg, that was your comment? I'm not exactly sure.
Oh, that wasn't mine. And actually, I wanted to challenge that assumption that a site for a low barrier shelter with navigation has to be secured and fenced. I don't know where that assumption comes from, if it comes from a best practice I'm unaware of, or something like that. Brother Francis is not fenced in, complex care is not fenced in, rescue mission is not fenced in, Downtown Hope Center has a secure outdoor area for clients, but is not overall fenced in. So I'm a little bit curious about where that came from. And I see Shelley's hand.
And as a former land manager, I would advise against a fence because HLB used to pay thousands and thousands of dollars a year to fix a fence when there was a perfectly good gate that was open right next to it. The fence would still get cut all the time. So I would not fence it if it were me.
Well, we can make that a call for someone. We had fence on when we did the facilitated group, and then early in this was actually, we had a list there, is it fenced? And so I don't know if that was critical, but that was one of the factors. So, I mean, it certainly could be discussed. So that's, I could put, well, I guess I would ask then, what would secure be? What would we be looking for here?
The shelter typically has potential security around. It can be roving. There's a front desk, it's controlled entry. So if you go to complex care or Brother Francis today and you walk in, you'll come to a reception desk. That's security. You can use cameras depending on the area of the facility to see what's going on. I believe it's that way at Gospel Rescue Mission as well and Downtown Hope Center. You're greeted when you arrive.
Okay, so I will remove, I'll leave well lit because it does seem really well lit there. That's a benefit. And I don't know if that's relevant. I didn't see that. I think they have standard exterior lighting, the parking and so on.
Yeah, I guess that would be the question on lighting. Would it meet Title 21 requirements for the use designation for exterior lighting? And I don't know if there is one.
Yeah, good point.
It would be driven by Title 21.
I don't know that the Arctic Rec Center had secure entry. You walk in and you walk quite a distance into it before you get to kind of a reception desk. It seems like the configuration would allow, it would certainly allow a desk to be moved closer to the entry.
I'd argue it's equivalent to Brother Francis. It's very equivalent to Brother Francis. You go quite a ways in, the clinic's on the left. Right? Yes.
Okay.
You can make it work in lots of spaces. The Sullivan, like, it's not purpose built, but you kind of beg, borrow, and steal, make it, tape off areas so that folks know here's where you come in.
Yeah, and it depends on which entry you use at the Arctic Rec Center. I mean, one has an office right up at the door, so that seems like an easy thing. And Arctic Rec Center did have cameras inside, I assume outside too, because there were quite a few inside. Seemed like a focus on them, and I suspect the Sprung structure that's already factored in. AD accessible. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine the sprung structure not being fully ADA accessible, and the Arctic Rec Center is as well. On-site parking, yes. Bob Dole noted that they might be a little shy compared to Title 21 at the Arctic Rec Center now, though it seemed like ample parking, and certainly for a congregate shelter seemed like it'd be plenty, but that's unknown somewhat. 1 per 3. Oh, for homeless and transient, then they would probably need to add some. See this note for the MOA parking requirement, or get a variance. Nearby medical facility, in both cases, yes. The neighborhood health center or clinic is actually, if you look at the property as a whole, it is right across the street from the far eastern part of the property. So it's actually fairly close. And of course, the Tudor Elmore location, got the Native Medical Center in Providence, very close. Grocery store, Arctic Rec Center is closer, 1.1 miles, and the Tudor Elmore Sprung Shelter, 3.7. So that's a nice feature. Distance from neighborhood, there is multifamily structures, quite a number of them just to the north of the Arctic Rec Center, and the Sprung is 0.7 miles, so that's across the street, across Tudor.
Where does that factor come from? Is it just an idea of just knowing what's around? Because again, I don't know where that idea of like rescue mission is right in the neighborhood. So I'm not sure, is that something that we're saying is desirable, or just it's something that we are aware of?
I think, anytime people will push back, and the people on the other side of that property line, we will hear from very quickly when this becomes known that we're even looking at it. So, and that's an issue, is public response to it. So I think certainly distant neighborhood, but we've also found you will get a response at 0.7 miles. The people in that neighborhood considered Tudor Elmore in their neighborhood. So these could be roughly equivalent as far as public response to it.
Okay, yeah, I'm just thinking if we share this document, like what does that mean to people reading it? That's the lens I'm using. Okay, thanks.
In our evaluation of when we did the facilitated group and others, we did make note of it. Are they separate from the residential? And like if you look at the Salvation Army's recovery center on 48th, well, there's no residential really well, there's actually there's not much, but it's primarily industrial area, and that was considered somewhat a plus because you don't have that fear, and in fact that does not cause much problem and is very close to the Heather Meadows that reacted very strongly against the Tudor old Alaska Club. So it is a matter of perception and how well they're run, obviously. Provides for dispersion of facilities. Both of them do. They're not downtown. I guess Sprung neighbors say that they are very close to, that with the rescue mission there, it's not dispersed. So I guess that's a matter of definition, but broadly, they're not downtown. Property taken off tax rolls has been an issue with public, but in this case, the Arctic Rec Center is not on the tax rolls, and were the not immediately used property sold to a private entity, rezoned and sold, it could be putting substantial amount of land on the tax rolls. Uncertainty of increased costs, that's fairly low with Arctic Rec Center because it's built. With the Sprung shelter, it's hard to know. I put in moderate because there's kind of contingency in the dollar amount that we showed before, but there is uncertainty there. There's no question. Attractiveness to clients. We did have in our meeting this morning, both of them are considered somewhat distant from where the customers are, essentially. And access for people without transportation and so on is a little bit challenging for both of them. Wetlands, not an issue with Arctic Rec Center.
Sorry, John. For attractiveness to clients, that should be like a location attractiveness to clients versus the structure. Because to me, it seems like that means structural attractiveness. Like what's it look like on the interior versus the location? Those are, I think, two different considerations.
Yeah, that's fair. I think they'll both be very attractive inside. So it's a good point. And that was trying to capture that. And I just left that open for discussion amongst the providers. And we just had a quick discussion this morning on that. And what came up was the access. Wetlands, not really an issue. Year built, and added this in there because a building built in 2015 is a new building. They went through the earthquake in 2018 with no damages. It's built to seismic. It's got sprinklers. Everything's very, very nice in there. It looks fresh and new. And obviously the sprung shelter would be, the best a sprung shelter can be, I think, and they can be very nice. So
on wetlands, so it says adjacent to wetlands on the northeast corner of the property for the ARC. Would that, if there was a replat, would there be any wetlands associated with the existing building?
I don't believe so. And I added that because there's always a question, are there wetlands? And, particularly with that big of a tract. But if you look at the plat, it's not a rectangle. There's a corner of it that's already tracted out that I believe belongs to the municipality that is wetlands. But I didn't see any wetlands indication on, what would be part of this purchase. Shelley, do you have other information on that?
Yeah, there are no wetlands on the site. Let me I'll take a clip and put it in the chat, a picture. But yeah, no wetlands that would affect any future development.
Okay. Yeah, I guess on that line, I would put no wetlands to affect utilization of the facility, because it seems like they would only attach to the potentially additional development of the included portion of the property. I'm already thinking of it like it's a separate parcel. I know it's not yet, but I'm thinking of it in that way.
So that top little corner that does have wetlands on it, that is a separate tract owned by the state.
Okay, so it's a separate tract.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I wasn't monitoring the comments very closely. So I see Jessica Parks mentions single point of entry. Did you want to say anything more about that, Jessica?
Sorry, I was just noting that when we were talking about security of facilities, that the fencing, I agree with everyone's thoughts about the fencing, and that the way to ensure the security of a facility is to make sure you have a single point of entry with staff contact immediately, which is what people all shared.
Any additional thoughts, questions, considerations for the facility comparison between the ARC and the Tudor Elmore facility?
I had some comments about it's at the bottom, and we're just talking about the whether the cost would be going up or not. He called it uncertainty of increased cost, low to moderate. I'd say the cost on the sprung is moderate to high, and I'm not attacking the mayor's office, but if you look at the trajectory and the narrative so far, he has been wrong several times in pretty big fashion. And so I would say it's moderate to high. From the beginning, we've never gotten our hands around what it's going to cost, and we've already obligated a bunch of money that we weren't allowed to spend, and that's the narrative thus far. So I would say it would be justified to say it's moderate to high, because that's the trend. But that's just my opinion.
I'll put that in, but that's just Hugh's opinion. I mean, I think because we don't know. So maybe that's it. It is high because we just don't know. At the work session on this regarding the Hickel contract, it seemed like we're at 95% design now. So we're getting closer to a more solid number.
I'm just saying that we have his history, and the history has said that they've underestimated on a regular basis. And that's, so it's probably, every time they've said it, it's been low. So it's probably going to be higher than whatever it is they say, even if they've gotten their numbers.
Rob, do you want to go ahead and talk about your comment?
Sure. I just think everything about the rec center being available. I mean, that had been identified. We had talked about it. It didn't seem possible. And then in the midst of this task force, it's become available. And I think it fits every possible need. And I could not agree more regarding the administration's proposal for this dome has been wrought with so many hurdles, so much misinformation, so much inaccurate. I'm always going to say we need more permanent housing, but if we need a shelter solution for now, this is it. Bar none. It's already done, it's already packaged, and it comes with land where we could develop more housing.
Thanks, Rob. Other discussion, comments, questions? Yeah, Hugh, go ahead.
The pricing on the Arctic Rec Center, I mean, we did it pretty basic. I mean, at the BOMA meeting, they reported that the new waste disposal facility was $500 a square foot. You know, my guess is that if you built it efficiently, the rec center, you could maybe get 350 a square foot. We use 350 a square foot, $300 a square foot for the thing that puts the building at about 7 million. And then the excess land, which was all the land, we figured that you needed about 4 foot of land for 1 foot of building. So that was a certain number. And then we subtracted that number from the 720,000 square feet. And that was excess land. And we put that at $8 a square foot, which is relatively conservative. We didn't really know what the soils was. So you're at about 12 million right there. That's
So if I put that in layman's terms,
yeah.
You say about 7 million for the facility and the remaining 5 point whatever for the land.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Little rule of thumb type for back of the napkin calculation.
Yeah. I mean, we just came to the conclusion that it wasn't crazy. We also felt like there's not a big buying pool. So what would an arm's length buyer be, theoretical buyer buy? I mean, I think really that you're the only buyer, or this is the only probably potential buyer for them.
So I think we had one more facility to update. Did we have anything else on the ARC Rec Center? I'm going to circle back at the end to see if there's anything we want to do with this information, because I believe the navigation center is back before the assembly on the 25th. So I thought we'd first run through kind of the rest and then circle back to see if there's an action item at the end that we might want to have or not.
Yeah, that would be helpful because we'd have more guidance on how much digger to deep into, or how much deeper to dig on the Arctic Rec Center cost.
Okay.
Early on, John talked about the old Alaska News Agency warehouse, and I looked it up, and it was under contract on the 29th of September. So it's currently spoken for.
Okay. That note, update this. All right. Thanks, Facilities Subcommittee. Lots of work. Appreciate that. Operations plans and estimates. So I think there hasn't been a meeting. We have now what the health department is actually contracting for, so we can either go back and refine, but I don't have, we would need the breakdown of what those contracts pay for services to know kind of by line item, so we could compare and contrast our operational estimates. If that's something we want to do, I'm happy to try to facilitate that if that's possible, but open to that conversation. And then we had done it only as to the emergency cold weather locations. There is now an operational estimate for the navigation center. I don't know if we want to explore that at all versus our congregate 150 cost estimate to see how they, again, how they compare and contrast, where they are different and where they're the same. So I am open to suggestions for anyone who's wanting to talk about operational costs, how we might want to approach that. Yes, Jessica.
I just wanted to say that I think it's a good idea to do some of those comparisons, because part of, especially as we've had this conversation about this work transitioning to be more about looking at future plans and how we as an HPRS come together around new facilities and addressing shelter needs, having some of those ideas of where the thoughts of the operations group varied and don't match up with what's actually happening, I think is really good for us all to know, so that we can adjust those expectations as we look forward. But I'm not saying it's necessarily something that has to happen, you know, this week or next week, but I think that that's good work to be thinking about and doing.
Okay. Yeah, I tend to agree. I would be great to sit down and have the health department join the operations plans and estimates, or through a community practice to kind of walk through their version of a pro forma for these facilities, and then where we are, and then, yeah, compare and contrast to know where the differences lie. Anything else we are concerned about or want to touch base on with regards to operations plans and estimates?
Do you think there's any value in looking at Arctic Rec Center as a specific site, and as an operations committee looking at where some of our estimates might tweak for that particular site, or are we not at that level yet for Arctic Rec Center?
I think it would fall within the congregate 150. So some of the same assumptions we utilized for Sullivan, but then we know that Sullivan's actual operating is less than what we estimated. So, or we could also look to the health department's estimates for the navigation center. I mean, to see if it's an apples to apples comparison. Because we now have an operations figure, so there must be something that's driving the figure for staffing on both the shelter and the navigation services side.
Okay, I think that makes sense then, to do that work as part of the overall comparisons, and not necessarily this one site specifically.
Yeah, we could pull the 150 congregate, and then we can take a look if we can get it, the NAV center operations budget, and then compare and contrast. Okay, just for operations though. Got it. All right. Sullivan demobilization. I'm gonna change the item or the agenda in the future to say demobilization. I don't like that word, demob. It's a weird word. Jessica, it's got you listed. Can you give an update? Taria is traveling today, unfortunately.
Yes. So our small group met. We actually took to calling it a transition committee, not necessarily even demo or demobilization. But we really talked higher level and agreed that the plan comes into play when the Sullivan Arena is no longer needed, when either there are no more residents there, or when there are sufficient weather criteria that would take that offline as an emergency cold weather shelter, and whether or not that is a transition that happens from emergency cold weather to just plain shelter, or to one of these other facilities that we've been discussing. We highlighted that there would be 4 main points as part of that transition plan. that there be clear and concise and open communication, both with providers within the HPRS and also the clients that are staying in the facility. That we establish milestones and track progress made towards them and the timing of those particular milestones. That we highlight that client choice and self-determination be part of any transition, and that we utilize coordinated entry for the transitions of the clients. And then discuss the different options for this transition, that it could be into other congregate facilities, whether that is capacity at Brother Francis, at Covenant House, at Downtown Hope Center, at Gospel Rescue Mission, or any new facilities that might come online. That there would be transitions into non-congregate facilities, such as some of the hotels that are coming online as part of the plan and part of the HPRS. That there would be transitions into housing, permanent supportive housing, workforce housing, transitions through the landlord housing partnership, or straight into independent housing if that's a suitable option. And that there be an option and ability that people could be transitioning into treatment from any shelter. And I would say the rest of the conversation tended to be pretty specific on aspects of those plans, but that would be a high level what our discussion was, and then wanted to bring that back to the group and get into more of those details.
Thanks, Jessica. So what I heard from there is there's a bit of a mapping out of various pathways to enter the system and exit the system. And then that there's an overall need, or maybe it occurred, to map the system capacity, and when something comes online, kind of where we might see the shifts. Because of course, if we're working with a universe of people, 350, and 100 housing units come online, and we estimate it will house 120 people, where within that system do we see the shift? Am I understanding that those are the two things that kind of need to walk forward?
Yes.
Okay. Great.
Hey, Jessica, if I may add two things.
Yes,
there was
please.
a discussion.
Anyone on the committee jump in.
About a timeline for client notification and like initiation of client work for transition. I think the group landed on 120 days, or was it 90 days? 90 days, Jessica, you correct me if I'm wrong, to initiate work with clients prior to the closure. Thank you, Rob. But, you know, it was brought up, if there's only 50 clients in emergency shelter, you might not need 90 days to work with 50 clients. So two different trigger possibilities of a population amount as well as warning time or lead time.
And I think on that point, we can suggest potentially a practice or a best practice, but it is specified in Title 16 what the minimum notice requirement is, I believe. So code will control the minimum, whether or not there's another practice or agreement established for something broader would be different. But I just want to make you aware that that's part of, I believe, the Title 16 revisions.
And then, oh my gosh, I lost my train of thought. There was one other thing, Jessica, that we discussed. Gosh, I forget. Sorry.
Title 16
we
and
did
17.
talk. Oh, I was going to say, we did talk a little bit about like what the plan would be if we had, well, I guess two different situations of clients not wanting to transition into something different. If you had, so if you had clients that you got to closing day and they did not want to leave the facility, what that might look like. And then also if you had clients that weren't allowed to be at other facilities, how that transition might work as well, if that's what you were thinking of. I do know that that was part of our discussion.
Sorry, I remember there was a communications need identified. There seems to be a lack of clear understanding of coordinated entry, how it functions, that all providers, Muni, that everyone is on the same page about how coordinated entry would work, as the method for prioritization of people moving out of. So a need about education around coordinated entry was identified by the health department, and I think is a good point for the comms group or another group.
So this is Roger. I'd like to speak to it. The communications that we talked about was also the same communications to the providers, to also to the stakeholders or the people staying there, so that they know what the criteria is for moving on and whatnot, and that the peer worker often relies on what's being told to the service industry, but then when they relate it to the individual receiving the services and it changes because there wasn't a clear communication, then it makes it more difficult for the individual to know where to accept knowledge or understanding from.
Yep, so I think that's a piece to take back to figure out what kind of information would make it clear that everyone's on the same page, both as to how coordinated entry prioritization works, as well as the pathways
The
in
stakeholders.
and out of services. Yeah, absolutely. I've seen one draft graphic floating around, so maybe by the time we meet next time, it'll be a little bit more clear. But I think the big one for those who are experiencing homelessness now is those coordinated entry assessments. And we're going to try to do everything at the coalition we can to make sure they're easy, convenient, and that we're reiterating that over and over and over again. So if you find gaps in that, please let us know. Rob commented coordinated entry should be the vehicle by which all people move from shelter into other housing. Absolute. And then with regard to the minimum notice, Jessica commented, we did discuss that minimum, and 7 days is not sufficient for providers or clients. I appreciate that. I just want everyone to be aware of what the code says, because that sets a threshold. It may not be a best practice or the threshold we desire, but it is the threshold set. Anything else on demobilization? So I assume we are going to work on the map and the system capacity. And Jessica, I will volunteer to lend myself to that using some of the documents and graphics I've previously made to see if we can tweak those so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I'm going to pass over to our CE folks here at the coalition if there's some kind of clarification, easy thing we can create for that. And then on the timeline for client notifications, I think right now we can note the desire for 90 days. We can note the requirement of 7 days in Title 16. And as we create those other graphics, see where those lines might fall within any potential timelines or ideas if there's movement within the system capacity. Does that sound like a reasonable way forward on looking forward for Sullivan demobilization? And I actually think this might be any emergency cold weather shelter location demobilization. Okay, well, orange thumbs up. I'll take it. 2 of them. All right. Aviator hotel demobilization. Was this a part of the broader conversation, Jessica? In terms of
yes,
working? Okay.
Yeah, so we did talk about it because we talked about this being more of a plan and strategy for transition of any, emergency shelter facility, recognizing that they are temporary in nature because they are stood up in response and part of the emergency cold weather shelter plan. So yes, we did discuss that and recommended that all of the strategies we were talking about applied to all of the different emergency cold weather shelter facilities, so that the same principles of using coordinated entry to transition people to new options as they came available, that those 4 main transition options be the ones that continued to be discussed around transition of all emergency cold weather shelter facilities, and recognizing that it could be a while before we have sufficient shelter beds, particularly low barrier shelter beds. So all of these facilities may enter into a transition plan at different times.
Got it. And is there any objection from the health department of including the aviator as a part of the emergency cold weather shelter plan? I know it predated that, but with the route in which it will be demobilized, it seems to coincide. But I don't want to overstep if there's a view that that's not a part of the emergency cold weather shelter strategy right now. I will send that question out via email to see if I can get that to make sure we are all on the same page about what's included in the emergency cold weather shelter plan as we move toward the end dates for those. Data management issues are up on the agenda next with the coalition. I do want to relay, I had a conversation with Alexis from the health department this morning. It was really great. We're going to see if we can't work together to look at maybe a unified dashboard, because nearly all of the emergency cold weather shelter locations, and then Brother Francis, as well as, yeah, I think that's it. Everyone but Rescue Mission and Downtown Hope Soup Kitchen use HMIS. So if there's some way to leverage that opportunity to do a singular dashboard, it would cover all of the facilities within the emergency cold weather shelter plan, which is what the MOA dashboard's trying to track anyway. So maybe we can get into one place to look. We can mirror it on both websites or something like that. So really utilizing HMIS to drive that. So that's a fun update, and hopefully we can work with our various IT folks to see what's possible. Any other data management issues that are coming up? HMIS is being used at the Sullivan. And is there the intention to use HMIS at the Alex Hotel?
Wasn't that in our recommendations?
If they were trying to bring those beds online soon, I'm just asking. I don't know the answer to it.
Thank you.
So I can follow up. And then, any other, the big data piece, I think that's important, that ties back to our prior conversations, ensuring everyone gets on coordinated entry, and that those coordinated entry assessments are up to date, so that when housing opportunities come online, that we can have, we have an up-to-date coordinated entry list so that we know who is first eligible for those housing opportunities. I think that's really important. It preserves equity within the system versus just picking based on a location or some other criterion. All right, communications with public and media, Felix and Owen.
Owen, I will let you take the lead on this one.
Thanks, Felix. We had a request from the Midtown Community Council to give an update on the Emergency Shelter Task Force. I attended last week and gave the update, which is that there haven't been new recommendations, so it was very similar to what was shared at the Assembly Committee on Housing and Homelessness, with the caveat that we were looking at tier 2 locations, and I shared the locations that we discussed last week, and as of this week, those locations changed, and I also let the community council know that things are changing weekly in regards to facilities. Felix was there. I don't know if there's anything else beyond that. I think last week we heard a request that there's a long-term look at communications regarding like, what do you want the public to know about homelessness, or is there a changed perception around like homeless services or what shelter means in a community? And I think that was echoed by Rob. But the communications subgroup hasn't convened since last week. So there hasn't been a chance to discuss those kind of broader suggestions, which maybe tie into a long-term, sorry, role of the task force.
Got it. So I think as we refine some of these maps, you know, in terms of like paths to access services and paths, you know, to housing, system capacity, I think there might be some documents and some education we can do with the public then. How do we, I think we need to continue to work. So the coalition's already been working on core concepts of things and really trying to promote those. So, you know, what is housing first? What does it mean? What does it look like? We talked about the cost of housing. I don't know if that's something the communication subcommittee wants to do or just wants that's, you know, if there's some other spin on that beyond what the coalition's already doing. We've just been laying some groundwork before we start into community conversations around anchored home to hopefully get everyone on the same page about core concepts within the system. Like, what is low barrier shelter? What is permanent supportive housing? What is housing? Housing first. What do we mean when we say housing? Because we're often, the quick question comes back when we say housing, someone will say, you mean a transitional housing program? And we say, no, like a house with a lease. And so, you know, we're really kind of at those core concepts, but totally open to where the communications subcommittee wants to go.
I have a question for the group, and maybe it should go through the comms subcommittee first, but you know, we've always said that the comms presentations are not really a public input process. They're really about one direction sharing information. But if this is moving into more of an anchored home long-term plan, what does public input on that plan look like? How is that captured? As it's not a policy, but it is a long-term plan, having that option or facilitated space to ask more open-ended questions about what is wanted from the community or what the community solutions could, you know, what comes out from the community.
Perhaps that goes back to the subcommittee. It's pretty quiet here, Ellen. The other thing we can work on is maybe pulling together some of the work of the subcommittees, just maybe into a quick one page to update per week. And maybe, you know, I mean, I think it's great when you guys go and you have the FaceTime. I think that's been very welcomed by a lot of community groups, but maybe we can all assist in some of the work we're doing just to collate it. So you don't have to create anything new that kind of shows, you know, where we're at. So like I would say right now with facilities, you know, we're doing this comparison of the Arctic Rec Center with the Navigation Center. Our other two tier 2 sites. One's just kind of nebulous. The other one seems to be potential, but we can dig in more on the P&A site. Similarly, we want to work that comparison. Like we can kind of put those things down into like, this is the work that's ongoing. But I'm not sure that there's, I mean, we might get feedback on that, but I'm not sure a lot of folks really are all that interested in the weeds other than location. And I do want to say comms has always been the hardest part of this work, always. Okay. That pretty much just made everyone silent. So I think with those ideas tossed out, maybe this comm subcommittee can convene again and see where it may want to take something or not, and we'll revisit it next week. So that brings us to wrap up and next steps, decisions made and action items. So I wanted to circle back to what we may want to do with this comparison between the NAV Center and the Arctic Rec Center. I believe the assembly meeting to take up the navigation center is the 25th. There is the committee meeting on Wednesday. And then I believe there's also a work session on the navigation center on Thursday. Felix will correct me if I have the wrong date. Does a side-by-side comparison, even with the unknowns, make sense to put out into out there into the world so that it's information considered by the assembly, or is that not something we are prepared to do?
I think it's something we should release. It's educational.
No, I appreciate that. I can understand the need to get it out there, but you know, this is a property that's on the market, and you know, I don't know, normally you'd think about making an offer and seeing if you can make any headway, and then, you know, and then talk to them about like, well, we're gonna start putting this stuff out there. So right now, you're just gonna put it out there. You talking about this comparison?
Yep.
I mean, your calculus and your dynamics a little bit different than most market stuff, Ed, but you know, I'm just saying that you know, I mean, I can see the benefit of it. It's like, we're gonna have it out, even if we're not even really sure if we're gonna be able to buy it or not. And we don't, it doesn't really should it matter? Will it matter to the people that are selling it?
So
That's a good question.
the inverse question though is, does it matter to the policymakers who are deciding how to spend money? And so I guess those are the two tensions.
Right.
It's been the tension since we've started
Always,
doing
yeah.
anything from a facilitated process forward. But it's not like we hadn't already discussed publicly the idea of the Arctic Rec Center and the listing in
Yeah.
public. We're not suggesting it's not worth what they're asking for it or anything beyond that. We're not maligning the listing. We're
Right.
simply saying, taking it at face value and taking the NAV Center at face value. Here is the information.
Okay.
Hard stop. That, I mean, that's how I view it, but I mean, this is a conversation, so.
I think it's probably the only way it can be done.
Other thoughts from those online, perhaps?
Oh, this is John. So just a broader perspective on this. One is that in kind of rational economic decision making, you look at where you are today and say, moving forward, what's our best deal? And, you know, with this kind of project, though, I think we'll hear a lot, oh, we spent so much on this already, we can't stop now. And I think that's human nature to look at things that way, but in a pure, what's best moving forward, sunk costs should not be counted. And that, so I'd just be prepared for that viewpoint. And then we do have the uncertainty, you know, as we discussed earlier on moving forward with the Navigation Center compared to the Arctic Rec Center. But there are unknowns between all of them. But I think sunk costs are sunk. We've moved past those. Thanks.
Anyone else? Only do it if there's consensus one way or the other. So I kind of need to know if you are interested in doing it or not, or want to wait. I mean, we could wait and come back to it on Monday, just knowing that the next day is the assembly meeting.
This is John again. I think decision here on presenting the information, which I'm happy to do, or anyone else, but it's really up to the assembly members. Do you guys want to hear it? And then Alexis, I see, is here, and others. Is it useful to the administration? It's really it's moved beyond a consensus committee, and is it the decision makers? Is it useful to the decision makers? That's who we should hear from.
John. So, from my perspective, thinking about my colleagues on the assembly, I think we are at a point where many of us are very much interested in the idea of a navigation center. Many of us are also not 100% tied to the idea of a navigation center on Tudor and Elmore. So I think some of my colleagues would appreciate having alternatives, having comparisons before we sink a whole bunch of new money into the navigation center. Some of my colleagues probably won't appreciate what they would see as an 11th hour switcheroo, or however you would call it. So I think there are going to be positives and negatives to sharing this with policymakers and sharing it with the public. But I think having the information out there for us to consider is probably better than not.
Yeah, I'd concur with that. And, this is the work that the Assembly tasked us was doing, was getting this information and present it to the Assembly, and can let them digest it or parse it, or I'm for releasing.
Well, you're thinking about making a play for this rec center, and they actually are aware that we're doing it. So,
With the price tag it has, the only ones who could come with the money
Yeah.
are probably the municipality or some kind of public-private partnership. Until you were to get public buy-in for it, you wouldn't have that possibility. I mean, unless there's someone else out there, and heck, we start talking about it, someone else may swoop in, who knows?
no, I don't think there's another buyer out there. I mean, it's not a moneymaker. And so it has to almost be a public entity that's gonna buy it. But I think it's just how you have to do it. And, I don't think let's just say theoretically, could you not do this and then, kind of do it? Yeah, it's just, there's no way. I mean, you have to get it out there, and then you have to find out. But then you wish there was some way to not do that, and then to try to get more prepared for it, because things could get weird.
Sure.
Yeah, like they could be like here from the neighborhood, then all of a sudden there was some talk, we were getting double talk from them, like, oh, we don't want to sell it to that. And then the pastor is saying, well, it's in line with our mission, so they're also of two minds or two things, and they could get scared, or something could happen, but I just think it's the way it goes. So I'm for it. I think, I hope you guys do it, and time is of the essence, so we should get on with it.
Anyone else, anyone concerned about making the comparison? And I guess what I would say is to leave it to the facilities group to determine the best format for that comparison to send along. It would need to do two things. It would go probably to Felix as the chair of the Housing and Homelessness Committee to then distribute to colleagues. And then we would also add it to the task force webpage. Those would be the two places it would go. Whatever the final result is. I mean, I think what you shared today was pretty clear. You take my name out of it, say Meg's elements, because they were all now discussed by everyone. And then if we wanted to run down any other information before to fill it out a little bit more, certainly try to help do that.
Shelley in the chat says, share it, a short cover memo with spreadsheet attached.
Yeah, this
Okay.
is John. I can do that, and then I'll break out those operating costs. We had talked about separating the facility costs from the hire operator as best we can. Those be unknowns, of course, but we'll break it out.
Okay. I saw Roger's hand too.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I didn't speak up when we were talking about the operation plans and estimates. I did have a thought afterwards. And that is, so one of the drivers is the staffing level. Historically, Sullivan had been 1 at 30 during the day, 1 at 50 during the night. I'd also like to point out the value, and if we could get this thought in there, a staffing level of the peer support specialists. And if that could be, if we could find some way to help work it into where it was advantageous for the operators to use individuals that have that certificate, even above and beyond what they can bill through the 1115 waiver. So if we had a peer support worker for 1 for every 90 or whatever, those folks would be able to bill through the 1115, and we could access a pot of money elsewhere to be providing behavioral health hand-holding and knowledge of how to get into.
Read my mind, Roger. I think as we work through looking at anchored home as a strategic plan, looking at those operational pro formas, particularly for congregate and non-congregate sheltering opportunities, how to braid those in, leverage Medicaid. Chuck and Celia's language as well. So it's on our radar. We just haven't had a chance to spend any time talking with particularly DBH to see how quick and easy that would be. Medicaid billing for homelessness services providers can be difficult because it's not their area of expertise, and Medicaid is its own language. But we're trying to figure out how to make that pretty routine. Thank you.
So sorry I didn't bring that up in
No,
topic.
that's great.
And yeah.
Okay, all right. Any other questions, action items, or concerns? All right, I don't see or hear any others. I will probably, this meeting feels like it's getting out early, kind of by design. I think I'm going to shorten the remainders to 1. I think we can probably move through a little bit more swiftly because the subcommittees are all doing such great work offline. And we will circle back next week. And then facilities subcommittee, you can just send me a copy of whatever you're wanting to send on to Felix. I'll make sure it gets posted on the website. Thanks all.
Thank you.